my philosophy has always been like, whether you're on the platform or in the booth or in the production room, wherever you're certain, like we're all leading people in worship. And in this day and age, we're leading people like in the physical room, we're leading people online, we're leading people in all sorts of. And so I was like, okay, because that really encompasses the platform people and the production side. And so I just started throwing stuff out there, and it was terrible. And nobody really noticed, but I sort of felt better about, I guess I was getting some stuff off my chest.
Come into the light.
Shadow moves in the dark.
Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee.
What is it? Gaff tape. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Gaff Tape. I am Nate Anderson here with my buddy Daniel Larson.
Hey, what's up, friends?
And if you haven't watched or listened to us before, the purpose of this show, why we're here, it's to shine a light in the shadows of production. And one thing that we know is true from this past year, it's been kind of a crazy year, especially when it comes to production and in church production too. There's been ups, there's been downs, there's been a lot of challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that helps us get through, Daniel?
Well, for me, it's memes.
It's the memes.
It's always the memes.
And you might say today our guest is a bit of an expert in memes, right?
Yeah, he's probably made 2 or 3 in his time. Mr. Worship Leader Probs himself, Brian Tabor, is going to join us, and I cannot even overstate how excited I am. I've been following him for quite a while. I think, Nate, you just started today.
Maybe.
But anyways, Nate is going to get to know Brian.
That's right.
And we are going to have an amazing conversation. So should we get to it?
Let's do it.
All right. As promised, we have with us Brian Tabor, Mr. Worship Leader Probs. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. I have to say this is a, kind of a personal milestone for me. I've been following Worship Leader Probs for a very long time.
Yep, it's true. Daniel shares the memes all the time.
I do. I might say that you've inspired me to try my own.
Oh man, it's so much harder than people think.
Yeah.
We're like 5 years in, and we've developed a little bit of a team approach. But for the first 3 years or whatever, it was just me, and I was constantly going to my wife saying, "Is this funny?" And she would just look at me kind of disappointed, be like, "You're still doing this?" But yeah,
you're still doing this.
Feeding it is a challenge sometimes. That's for sure.
I'm sure.
Thanks for following.
No, absolutely. So yeah, we just want to dive right in and really just hit this first question. Because I know for a good amount of years, no one knew. But who is Worship Leader Probs?
Oh man, so I'm just a worship leader. I'm in year 26 in the local church, and one day, it was about 5 years ago, I was walking through the church, and a dear saint, said or did something. I have racked my brain to try to remember what it was, and I can't remember what it was because that would be a great story. But it literally stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And then it hit me. I'm like, how funny is it that people all over the world are experiencing something similar to this right now? Like it was Sunday morning, and so I went back to my office, and I'm like, "Man, I need an outlet. I need some sort of therapy." And so I didn't know really much about Instagram, and I certainly, if you look at the account, I knew nothing about memes in the beginning. So it's pretty horrific if you go back to the beginning. But I was like, what can I call it? And so I was just searching names. I found this, and I was like, okay, that kind of has a ring to it, Worship Leader Probs. Mm-hmm. And because, my philosophy has always been like, whether you're on the platform or in the booth or in the production room, wherever you're certain, like we're all leading people in worship. And in this day and age, we're leading people like in the physical room, we're leading people online, we're leading people in all sorts of. And so I was like, okay, because that really encompasses the platform people and the production side. And so I just started throwing stuff out there, and it was terrible. And nobody really noticed, but I sort of felt better about, I guess I was getting some stuff off my chest. And so, again, I didn't know anything about Instagram. So I started noticing some blue check mark, people with these blue check marks by their name. I'm like, what is that about? And so, I'd go to Google, what's it mean to have a blue check mark on Instagram? And I was like, oh, these are famous people. And I didn't know who a lot of them were, even in the beginning. I remember the day Paul Balash followed, and that was like, he was like my hero from worship leader side. And I was like, oh, wow, that's super cool. Mm-hmm. And again, I was anonymous. And so it kind of took a turn as we grew. People were still sending funny stuff and all that, but people started sending these like really serious ministry questions, like stuff they were dealing with in their church, stuff they were dealing with in their relationship with their pastor. This is going on in my team. What do I do? I have or, hey, my pastor found out I played guitar. I'm 17 and he said, hey, congratulations, you're in charge of worship.
Oh my goodness.
Like, where do I start? And so I took that to my wife, and she was like, okay, now I understand. But we were like, but how needed is this if people are reaching out to someone that is anonymous, like they don't know who this is. This could be like just some knucklehead, and it honestly probably is, but it could just be some knucklehead. So they start asking ministry advice and all that, and I was like, okay, wow, this is needed. And so that's kind of how the whole thing got rolling.
Wow. I love how it was therapeutic for you to begin with. Like, that was the whole reason for it. Was like, some people have counselors, Brian had Instagram, and that works, man.
So it's really funny. I'm in a chat of other Christian memers. Shout out to the Illuminati.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah,
what have we entered into?
There's a bunch of us in there. So there's this account, the Honest Youth Pastor, and his account is much larger than ours, but his account started in the very same way. And there is kind of a common thread for all of us, and the reason that we started. So
yeah, that's so amazing. Well, hey, group therapy is good. So,
absolutely, man.
Absolutely,
we need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we're just gonna rewind just a little bit, or maybe a lot. I don't know. I don't know.
About 26 years.
Yeah, but how did you end up in what we like to call the shadows of production?
Man, so when I started in ministry, it was a very different landscape. Like, I'm going to date myself here significantly, but when I started in ministry, we didn't have voicemail, we didn't have email. Our church didn't have a website. We didn't project lyrics. We printed them in a bulletin.
Yeah. So is this pre Wayne Watson?
Let's see. This would have been, probably, well, or maybe kind of right as he was. This would have been like early 90s.
There we go.
And so, like, if you were like if you were doing something in the main, like the sanctuary, we don't project stuff in here, man. But like if you were leading for a class or leading worship for retreat or something, you could use those overhead transparencies, and you got to have somebody who's pretty skilled who can, whip those out as you're flowing through the set. So, back in that day, like, at least in most of the settings I was in, I was responsible for all of it. And so, I'm trying to navigate, like, my first church, I was 23 years old. It was a church of about 1,000. I was the only worship staff member. And so, like, I'm trying to help design lights, and I have no comprehension of what it takes to do that. I've never operated a light board. I'm trying to communicate with volunteers. So it was a very, very different landscape back then. And that's kind of how I ended up with what very limited experience I have in production. Yeah. It was kind of like, here's the deep end. Good luck.
How did you end up in that role? like as a 23-year-old?
So my wife and I went to Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana. And during the summer, we were in these groups that would travel, and go to congregations that were affiliated with the denomination. And we'd lead worship and sing and talk about the university and all of that. And so we went to a camp in Tennessee, and there were 5 of us in the group. We were in charge of youth, and there were 3 youth. So we outnumbered them tremendously.
I'm sorry. I'm trying not to laugh, but that's so funny.
Oh my gosh, it was terrible. It was terrible. So, and then, oh my gosh, you guys, the senior high, only one of the kids was in senior high.
Oh my gosh.
And his dad was an Elvis impersonator. Nice. Professionally.
Nice.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a crazy week. But the speaker that week was a pastor in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is just about a half an hour from Anderson. So they had us down. We kind of hit it off with the senior pastor, and they had a worship guy, an incredible worship guy there. And they had us down to lead worship one weekend, and we were like, oh, this is a great church. If we get married someday, who knows if that's going to happen. We got married someday. We moved to Indianapolis. Maybe we could go to church here. So then about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months later, the worship guy called me and he was like, hey, I resigned today. I was like, wow. Oh man. And he goes, and I think they're going to ask you to do like an interim worship leader. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So, my extent at that point was like leading worship in my youth group growing up. And then I did some stuff in college, and I certainly had an worship internship. But I mean, to be given the reins right as soon as you graduated from college, like I had almost no experience with church choirs. And as I said before, like 0 with production and all that stuff. So I think I was supposed to do maybe 3 or 6 months of this interim, or maybe it was open-ended, maybe just like while they searched. And so after a few months, they were like, hey, would you ever consider hanging around a while longer? And I was like, well, okay. They're like, we want to invest in you. We love your heart. We want to help you develop the things that you don't feel like you've had a chance to develop yet. And so that turned into 8 years of my first ministry. And I know not everybody shares that. I feel very blessed that out of the gate, I got something of that length, that not everybody shares that experience. So I certainly was, grateful for that. So yeah, it turned into 8. So that's how I landed there at the church in Indianapolis.
Wow.
Brian, you were telling us.
But I'm still memeing those stories.
That's good. You have to. It's therapeutic.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
You were telling us a little bit before about how you kind of officially became known as the worship leader, probs guy yourself. Yeah. How did that happen?
So, as the account grew, I would get this question a lot, like, who are you? How? And I got this one the most. It was like, are you following me around, or how do you know?
Love that.
How do you know what we're dealing with? And I was just like, guys, I'm one of you. That's how I know. Like, these are all things that I'm living in my own life. And so, they kept. So at some point in there, we started the podcast, and so I was at I have a partnership with the Experience Conference that happens in Orlando every September, and Jeremy Van Valkenburg, who's production mega leader at Transformation Church in Tulsa.
Pastor Jer Bear.
Yeah, Pastor Jer Bear wasn't in Tulsa at that point, and so we're at a meeting, and we had never met each other before, but we're just talking at dinner and really hit it off. And he was like, bro, or wait, I was like, hey, bro, I really need to tell you something. And he got this really serious look on his face. I think he thought I was going to unburden myself of some like deep sinful secret that I've been, holding on to.
In a way
And
it
I was
is, but
in a way it is. So I said, man, there's this account on Instagram, Worship Leader Props. He goes, oh yeah, I follow it. It's great. It's great. I said, man, it's me. And he didn't believe me. I was like, no way. There's no way that's you. Because I'm like a back of the room guy. Like I'm not the center of the room. I'm not like in our staff meetings at our church. I'm not the guy telling jokes or expressing my thoughts on this or that. I'm sitting in the back and just keeping my mouth shut usually. And so that was a shock to him. And he was like, man, you ever thought about doing a podcast? I was like, well, I never listened to a podcast before. But sure, I don't, and he had done one before, so he knew kind of the back end stuff that you have to do to make that work. And I was like, here's the deal. I don't want anybody to know it's me. Maybe someday that will happen, but right now, I don't want anybody to know it's me. And he goes, man, we should put like a filter or some sort of disguise on your voice. So we did, and we thought that would be funny. I think some people were kind of annoyed by it, but it was like this really deep, like Barry White, like on the news when you're watching somebody and they want to be anonymous. It was that kind of deal.
Right.
And so as the podcast, grew, the Instagram kept growing, and people were like, okay, when are you gonna? And I'm like, okay, you know what? You get us to 50,000 Instagram followers and I'll tell you who I am. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my wife and I was like, that will never happen.
Oh my gosh.
There's no way 50,000 people were going to follow this account. So it happened a couple years ago, and we had a big like reveal night and all that stuff. And there were certain people they were like, I knew it. And then the others were like, they still didn't believe it just because that's just not my personality to be like out in the middle of everything. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's it.
Jeez. That is so funny. Okay. So, man, that's incredible. I can literally picture myself. I was talking with, so I had worked at a church before, coming to Resi, and the production director and I were sitting in a room, and we were like, who is this guy? Like, I just like remember that moment. And so it's full circle.
Yeah. And it was really funny. Like, so we record on Zoom our podcast. And so we had to back in the day when we're interviewing people, we had to swear them to secrecy. Like you can't tell everybody. Right. And a
couple of NDAs and
exactly. We had Chris McClarney and who knows everyone. I'm like, dude, you cannot, that was the crazy, one of our first big interviews was him. And he had us come to a Jesus Culture concert. So Jeremy and I were backstage at a Jesus Culture concert in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because of an anonymous worship meme account.
Wow.
And we asked him, I'm like, why in the world? First of all, did you give us your phone number? Secondly, you invited. He goes, man, if you got to go, what a great story. Christian songwriter, murdered by rando, Christian meme.
Christianity today.
Exactly.
So,
that's amazing.
Brian, as you've been kind of, less anonymous now, what would you say, does a part of you miss that anonymous anonymity, that's the word, or do you enjoy it now, or how's that been different for you now?
There are certainly moments where I miss it, because it's I really, and this is straight from the heart, I never wanted this to be about me at all. It's my heart was for it to be about all of us, because these are all of our probs, these are the things that all of us are doing. And so I never really wanted it to be about me. And so the logo could be any of us. It could be either one of you guys or me or whatever. And so there are moments where I miss it. I think having like come out or whatever, it brings certain opportunities that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
Like we never really could use the Instagram Live feature for anything because no one knew who I was. And, doing events and things like that, like it was really funny. I would go to like Experience Conference and I would make memes about Experience Conference. And I was on the planning team at that point, but nobody on the planning team knew it was me.
Oh my gosh.
And so behind the scenes, there would be these conversations about the worship leader probs guy's here and he's making fun of us.
It's one of us. It's like a 12 angry men sort of situation there. When you're
Man. I remember
Yeah.
I made a meme about the host and I thought it was funny. But one guy on the team like got in the comments and he was not happy. Like he loves the host apparently. And that is not, you got to take this down. That is a great guy. You should not be making fun of him. So
As you're in the meeting with him.
exactly. And so there are moments where I was like, oh man, I can't really do that anymore. But this is funny. Like last week we were at Costco here in Indianapolis and it was right before we recorded an episode of our podcast. So I have like a shirt and a hat on and I'm just, we're checking out. The lines are enormously long. And so the young guy who's boxing up our stuff at the checkout thing, he goes, hey man, I follow that account. And I was like, oh, really? What? And he goes, yeah, it's really funny. Our whole team, we talk about it when we're together on the weekends and he still isn't making the connection that it's me or whatever. And I was like, well, what do you like about it? And he was like, well, it's just real life. It's exactly what we're all experiencing. And I was like, good. And I said, well, man, I'm really glad you're enjoying it. And he was like, wait a second. And so we got to talk and we shouted him out on our podcast this week. And those are kind of cool moments just because, I want it to be, I hope it's relevant. I hope it's something that we always say, we want to make you laugh. If we can make you laugh about the stuff you're walking through, because we're all walking through one version of it or the other. If we can make you laugh, then we can hopefully remind you that you're not in it alone. And then let's have a conversation about it. Like, how do we fix it, or how do we solve it, or how do we at least make an impact in it where we can make it better for the team and the kingdom and for you and all that stuff. So
yeah,
that's amazing. All right. So on the topic of making people laugh, I'm so curious as to, you have this prayer concerns, kind of, I don't know what you call it, like a feature of worship leader prompts, a central service, we'll say.
there you go.
And so I'm just curious, can you give us like a top 5? I'm sure it's going to be hard, but maybe a top 5 either submitted or personal prayer concerns that you've come across over the years.
So when we started our podcast, like I didn't know anything about podcasts, and I was like, my wife is convinced I'm kind of an undiagnosed ADD, and so I was like, it needs to be something that holds people's attention. Like we're gonna laugh. We have to laugh, and so we got this idea. Like, how funny would it be if we had people send in their church complaints? And I was like, that will never last. We'll run out of them at some point. Well, this is episode 131, and we've shared them in every episode. We've actually done episodes of nothing but prayer concerns.
Oh my gosh.
We get so many. So, and some of them, of course, are sad and not funny. We engage with those in a little bit of a different way in the DMs, but
sure.
But yeah, man, we get some humdingers. So we got one once that just said zipper.
Zipper.
Somebody in the congregation just wrote that on their card, zipper. The worship leader had forgotten to take care of business.
Yeah.
We got that. We got one. This was more recent. We got one. They had added some moving lights into their light rig. And somebody came up after the service and said, I did not like that. we got one, man, this was back when Jeremy was on the podcast. We got one that a lady like frantically ran up to the booth because she told them that the hazer was bothering her corn allergy.
Yeah.
It was upsetting her corn allergy. We made a shirt out of that one. And then, I'll tell you straight up, this came from my own church, and still to this day. So there's a Hillsong song called Calvary. The Calvary covers it all. It's a great song, and we do it. We have done it at our church, and I got an email from a lady in our church who she used to be my assistant, so it's like a person I know, and she was like, "Hey, I just wanted to bring something to your attention. When we sing that song, my kids always leave confused because all they can think about is horses." And I was like, "What?" And so I'm like looking at the lyric, and I was like, "You mean they're confusing Calvary with cavalry?"
Yeah.
That would maybe be step one, like explain the difference. And so when I read that one on the podcast, that set off like a 10-minute, that was there. It was not planned. It was totally spontaneous. Jeremy trying to pronounce those two words. So we turned that into a shirt, and it was about a month ago we did that song at our church, and this lady is in like the second row right in front of me, and I could not keep a straight face. And the band, they all knew the story, and she's just sitting out there, and I'm like, oh man, you can't make this stuff up.
Gosh, that's so brilliant.
Man. And how do you not slip into the other word every once in a while on accident?
It was pretty tough, man.
Yeah. So
that's what confidence monitors are for.
Right,
Just read the word
until your CG app decides to play a trick on you.
That would not be nice. That would not be nice.
Would be epic.
An Anchorman move. So for you, Brian, obviously, you take these meme-worthy moments of the collective, worship and production community and bring them together. But for you as a worship leader, what would you say in your 26 years is like your most meme-worthy moment that you've encountered?
Oh man, there are some, so something happened at our church last week, and I got to figure out how to use it. So we're a Christian church. We do communion every week, and we pre-order. I don't know what the company's name is, but we pre-order these little packages.
It's
like
those things with a little paper cracker on top.
Those things that are impossible to open.
Mm-hmm.
They are, and so apparently, there are churches that celebrate with real wine, and then there are churches that celebrate with grape juice. And so, we're a grape juice church, and apparently they accidentally slipped part grape juice, part wine into our order last week. And so I was not leading, and I was so bummed that I was not there. But during communion, people at one of our services, people all over the room, their heads are like shooting up, and as soon as they take communion, because it was real wine. And obviously that can derail quickly if it's somebody dealing with addiction or whatever.
Sure.
But most of the people have been pretty good sports about it so far. It was obviously a total accident. I would say if I had a Mount Rushmore of like epic fails in my ministry, like the pole position would be, so this was back at that first church. This would have been probably mid 90s, 96, 97, maybe. Senior pastor's out of town. The youth guy is speaking, and he's speaking on friendship. And he's like, I want to use a movie clip. I want to use a clip from the movie Forrest Gump. So great movie. If you've ever seen it, there's this character, Lieutenant Dan, played by Gary Sinise. And if you've seen the movie, you know it. Lieutenant Dan is very colorful language. So it'd be pretty tough to pull a clip out of there and not and avoid his colorful language.
Sure.
So there's this scene where Forrest is they're in Vietnam. Forrest is running into the jungle and pulling his friends out. And that was the clip that the youth guy wants to use. And it's in the middle of his sermon. So he's preaching and back in that day, I had to go like to Blockbuster and rent a VHS tape.
Right.
And so I'm at home on Saturday night and I'm trying to cue this clip up, and Kim is hearing it, my wife Kim, and she's like, "Oh, Brian, that's really close. Like, how are you going to make sure that this doesn't go sideways?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to be in the booth." And so I was young enough and dumb enough to think just my presence in the booth alone was going to make sure nothing went sideways. So I took it in that morning early, and I'm queuing it up in the system, and I get it all ready. So the youth guy is preaching. He says, "Hey, here's a clip that perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about." Roll tape, and the very first thing that plays over the system was GD in the service.
Oh my gosh.
And, you know, husbands and wives are like turning to each other like little kids that were asleep in the pews. Their heads are like popping up all over the worship center. The sound guy literally just fell back. And I was like, "Oh no."
Oh my goodness.
Maybe nobody heard it.
Right.
And so they heard it. Fortunately, they all knew it was an accident. And I learned the hard way that when you put a VHS tape in, it kind of whines every time. And that's really difficult to cue it with just a regular VCR. So I had this guy in my church who was a video editor, and he goes, "Hey man, next time just bring it to the shop, and I'll grab that clip for you."
That is so amazing. Hey, but you found your video editor.
There you go. Yeah, right. Team growth.
The
Right?
Lord will provide.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh man. Okay. So, okay. You did say Mount Rushmore, which there's like multiple heads on that monument,
yeah.
but I'm going to save those for maybe another podcast.
All right.
So we also know that Worship Leader Probs is more than just a meme account. You know, you guys are doing, you had kind of mentioned before, people are reaching out to you guys with like, you know, real problems, real things that they're walking through, you know, other than just, you know, singing the song in the wrong key.
Right.
And so you know, kind of walk us through like what that journey, the other side of Worship Leader Probs, like the ministry side of that. Walk us through like what that's meant to you, and then also to the community that follows you.
Well, it as the account grew, it very quickly became more than one person could handle, because, you know, you're getting all kinds of DMs, and some of them, what's a great service to use for streaming? Resi. That's a really quick answer.
Hey,
right?
Thanks for that.
You got it. You know, some are really, really long, and it just you want to be thoughtful. You know, they're entrusting you with this piece of their life, and so we want to take those really seriously. So, back when Jeremy was involved, you know, the production stuff, I was like, "Hey, buddy, I need you to tag in on this. I don't know how to answer this." And so he would do that. And then we developed a team of people that are worship and production people in local churches from around the country. And they're called the street team for lack of any better creative name, but they're wonderful, wonderful people. And they all take shifts kind of manning the account. And so they're all people that we trust wholeheartedly to answer questions in a way that honors the Lord, that honors the Word of God, that we don't have any, we're not going to share any weird stuff, you know? So
Sure.
These are all really good people. And we have group me thread that where we're always batting around, hey, we got this DM, we just got one this week on from a worship leader who's dealing with an executive pastor who has a child who sings on the team, and it's kind of taken things sideways. And so, we're kind of chewing on that together. What's a manageable way to a manageable approach that we can give this person to handle this very real situation in their life. And sometimes it's that, sometimes it's, when do you know it's time to leave? Sometimes it's all kinds of stuff. And so some of those things we save for the podcast. We're really blessed to have a senior pastor who's involved a lot. When we went to Philo conference a couple of weeks ago, Scott Lungier, our senior pastor, went with he's not the senior pastor at my church, but he's the senior pastor who's involved in worship leader probs. And so he and I went together. And so we recorded a live podcast and we took questions. And I had told them ahead of time, what's a question you've always wanted to ask a senior pastor, but you're afraid to ask your senior pastor.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Bring those questions. And so, that gives us a whole other wrinkle in the conversation. Like, if you need to pitch a huge video upgrade, what language can you use for a senior pastor who has absolutely no understanding of that?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
How do you get them on board? How do you get them to understand how important it is, especially on this side of COVID and live streaming and all of that? And so all those are great ministry opportunities just to be able to walk with people through the real situations that they're dealing with in their own lives and ministries. And, the laughs are great. I love to laugh. My wife would tell you that she was like, only God could take all the things that you're passionate about and roll it into one entity.
Sure.
And it's this crazy uncle that lives in our house called Worship. So, yeah,
it's amazing. You mentioned COVID. You mentioned these questions that you're taking and have taken for the podcast and everything. But what would you say? In the past year, what are some of the both positive and negative themes that you've seen through the worship leader, worship community?
And that's great. That's a great question. I think it forced us into a deeper level of creativity because we're like, okay, overnight, we're all TV producers, most of us have never done anything like that. And so it forced us to really think through the intentionality of our planning, the intentionality of the execution of our services. How do you engage somebody who's not physically in the room? I think those are great questions, and I think that's as horrible and painful as COVID has been for so many people. For those of us who plan and produce and create experiences of worship for people, I think those are some positives that came out of it. It really forced us into a different level of creativity. In terms of challenges, man, you're that question that we're all wrestling with, how do you focus on both at the same time? The people who are now, as we've been gathered back for almost a year now. So as more and more people are coming back, as our state has opened, how do you keep engaging the people who are there physically and also the people who are online?
Sure.
What does that look like in different settings? That's certainly a challenge. Keeping your team engaged when there's this long period of time when you can't be together. And like our church we have 3 campuses, and so we send teams to each, including our main campus. So there's 4 sets of teams going out every weekend, and there already was a lot of time when we weren't all together. So, man, that's been a challenge. You've had to deal with probably teammates who were fearful about coming to church and serving until, things opened up or they got vaccinated or whatever the case may be. I mean, it's been, this has been a test, man. This was not in the playbook for any of us.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, we love to ask is more like kind of geared towards the future because, every organization has, plans that they're looking forward to. And now, post-COVID, those plans, have probably shifted a whole bunch, over the past year. And so what do you guys, in your ministry, and this could be a worship leader probs question and a, the church that you lead worship at, kind of question. What do you guys see when it comes to, the future of production, worship? Where are we headed, as the church?
That's a great question, man. So I'm in the Midwest, and so for me to answer that question, it'd be different than somebody in California, or Vegas,
absolutely.
or Seattle, or New York, or wherever. But for us, I think we are probably we're probably dialing back on flash, bells and whistle type effects and things like that, and kind of how do I say that? Like we're re-engaging more of these, like let's kind of strip some things away, like almost the song, The Heart of Worship, that's kind of how we're approaching. As people are coming back, we're kind of sticking to a little more familiar. We're really going for heavy engagement.
Yeah.
And so, there are lots of places, you hear about, senior pastors standing in front of their staff and saying, okay, pre-COVID, we were a church of, 5,000. Realistically now we're a church of 2,000 or 1,500 or whatever the numbers might be. And so it's an opportunity, to get out there and really focus on reaching people and building the kingdom. But as your question, like it certainly affects, plans for budgets and, in some cases, for those who are paid staff, there are jobs that have had to go away. And, man, that's certainly a test. That's a test big time for the people who are walking through that. I think, man, it's kind of a refocus for the church.
Sure.
That's at least how we're facing it at our place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's, kind of one of the things that has been, kind of a common thread, post COVID that we've heard from so many people is, let's do what we're, here to do. And that's, the Great Commission, and how do we focus on that?
Yeah.
Which is honestly like really encouraging because, maybe pre-COVID things were maybe more focused on, the bells and the whistles and, how can we become more attractional as a church? And now it's more, how can we steward the, what we've been entrusted with, which is really cool.
Yeah, whole new audience, whole new set of challenges, whole new opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, one of the questions we always like to ask too is, gear is great, and in your case, memes are great, and
he's got gear. He's got an acoustic guitar.
Yeah. But and we talked about why you started originally. What keeps you going? What's your heart? What is your why for why you do what you do? And has that changed over the time that you've been doing this?
I think these are such great questions to really help me really focus in. I go into an episode of our podcast recording right after this. And so I'm like, man, this is great, timely stuff that we need to be thinking about. So,
we're going to ask you about your entire church's workflow right after this. So.
Oh man. I think the thing that keeps me going is, some of the Christian meme community, they push buttons on purpose. We're not that kind of an account intentionally. Sometimes the memes do push buttons, and my stance is always, man, we've worked our tails off to grow the following, so we can just engage as many people as possible. And so I'm not gonna run anybody away, but so we do get some DMs occasionally that are kind of out of left field, like, what were you guys thinking? And but mostly what we get are those heartfelt ministry questions, and to have the chance to walk with somebody. They may not even be somebody in the United States. In a lot of cases, it's people in, foreign countries, and, to get to walk with them through, it's like this moment in time where you intersect with this person that in all likelihood you will never meet in person, but you have this opportunity to encourage them, to try to give some words of help and encouragement, maybe some experience. My stance has always been like, I am far and away not an expert in this field. I've got some answers, and let's put my answers together with your answers, and let's have a conversation and figure it out. And if we can't figure it out, let's go find somebody who can help us figure it out. And those are all things that I think we've been equipped to do. And those are the moments that, I'll screenshot something and send it to the team in Group Me, and goes, I'll say, guys, this is a great reminder for me and for all of us as to why we're doing this, because it's every day. Like I was telling somebody last week, excuse me, whatever time you think it takes to run like a meme account of our size, and there are meme accounts, memes for Jesus, epic Christian memes. Those are 400,000 or 500,000 followers. Like, that's a whole different deal. But whatever time you think it takes to run ours, multiply that by 100, and maybe you're in the ballpark.
Wow.
Because it's 24/7, 365. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. But those moments where you get to walk with somebody, that's an honor, man. That's a privilege. And those are the things that keep me doing it.
Love it.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has truly been such an honor to get to, kind of sit and just really hear about how, you've journeyed through this, world of production over the years, and how really it's just amazing how, God has used you to, really provide therapy for so many people in ministry, and that is no small feat. So thank you.
And my honor, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And right back at you. Thank you for what you're doing. You, at a time when we desperately need great and easy to use technology to help get the message of the gospel out. You guys are helping us do that. So thank you very, very much.
Well, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
Absolutely.
Brian. So I finally know who it is.
How did you not know before?
I'm a casual Instagrammer. So
Very true. Very true. Well, I cannot even begin to express. Okay, maybe I'm overstating this, but that was maybe one of my favorite conversations ever.
Yeah.
It's just such a real dude, and he, obviously has such a heart for ministry, and I just love the fact that this was, this whole worship leader probs thing was started out of his need for an outlet. Mm-hmm. And, you and I are both from church world, mm-hmm. and, we've been in those same trenches, and for him to, I know that wasn't like the goal was to, provide, all of us with, an outlet of our own to feel like we're being related to, but man, so needed.
Yeah. Well, I love how, just like we were saying, it started as just a way for him to get his thoughts out, right? And a way for him to express some things that, he just had going on in his mind. And then all of a sudden it's, people relate with these things. People relate with these, good times and bad times and funny times. And so it's cool that he's been able to bring that community together.
No, sure. Absolutely. And I love, that last question we talked about, what's at the heart of it. And then, it's crazy that, an account started to provide laughs, like he said, is able to have the impact on the other side of those laughs, when it comes to walking with people through real problems, real things that, are being dealt with. It's just what a cool position that he's in. And it's awesome that, him and his team are, rising to that challenge. Yeah, super awesome.
Totally. Really cool guy, really cool, awesome team that they have doing what they're doing. Yeah.
Pastor Jerbear, if you're watching, you're next. We got to get you on. We got to get the other side of that conversation. So, but I think that's all we've got. So don't forget, hit subscribe, like us, follow us, and most importantly, just share this podcast out. That's really, what we're trying to do here is, help those of us that are in the production community feel seen, loved, and appreciated. And, a lot of times there's not a lot of that going around. And so this podcast is really just meant to kind of move that mission forward. So, and you guys sharing, this content is really, really helpful in doing that. So also one small request. Our Apple Podcast review area doesn't have any written reviews. So I'm going to personally ask you guys that are watching this to just take a minute, write a written review. If it's a negative review, don't worry about it. It's fine. We're all good. But if you got something great to say about the show and we've been able to kind of help you at all along the way during your production weekend or week, it would really mean a lot to us if you would just drop some comments.
For sure.
So
awesome.
That's it.
Very cool. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good one.
Goodbye.
Thank you.